Hey, what's up, y'all? This is me here, Michael Franti, and welcome to this week's episode of the Stay Human podcast. I've been excited about this for weeks because this brother that we got on today is really just doing some of the most amazing work that's out there in the world of documentary film. And not only that, but just getting people to think about the world in different ways. And so I want you to meet Jeff Orlowski. He's the director, producer, and cinematographer of the award-winning films Chasing Coral and Chasing Ice. And Chasing Coral received the U.S. Documentary Audience Award at Sundance in 2017, and Chasing Ice received the Documentary Cinematography Award at Sundance in 2012, and was nominated for an Academy Award for the Best Original Song. And both films were shortlisted for an Academy Award for Best Documentary, screened at Congress, the United Nations, and have garnered awards and accolades from film festivals all around the globe. And his latest film is one that I hope that you have seen. It's the #2 most watched documentary on Netflix. It's reached over 38 million households in its first 28 days up there. And so it's a film that's called The Social Dilemma. We're going to talk about that more as we get into it. But first of all, Jeff, welcome to the Stay Human podcast.
Thank you so much, brother. So glad to be here with you.
Awesome. Jeff, I want to talk about you, as we always do. We get deep into where people come from, but just so people who maybe haven't seen all three of those films, could you just give a description about what you do and why you do, and just a little bit about those films?
Yeah, for sure. First, I love the framing of your podcast too, around like if you know somebody's story, like if you know their story, there's this innate connection and this love that's available there. I actually studied anthropology in college, and so many people have said to me, you studied anthropology, how'd that lead you to filmmaking? And for me, it's like this most obvious connection. Like, you study people, you study culture. Yeah. When you understand people, when you understand culture, you know, you care about them, you have this connection to them. So it just seems like an absolute connection in my mind. I got into filmmaking through photography. I was born and raised in New York. My dad actually had a darkroom in our house. And so I was born and raised on Staten Island in like the outer boroughs of Manhattan, out of the city. And I never realized until high school or college just how special having a darkroom was. Yeah. I'm going to pause real fast. Can you hear that behind me, or is that...
I thought it was a sound effect of you splashing chemicals in the darkroom back there. It sounds really cool. So Jeff's got this like really cool plant wall behind him, and every now and then you're gonna hear this, like, it's not actually a flushing of a toilet, but it kind of sounds like that. So if you hear that, just imagine that it's actually a dark room, and he's just he's fluffing around in the chemicals.
Happen. Yeah. No, we're literally watering a bunch of plants in the background as we speak. So I got into filmmaking through photography, and Chasing Ice and Chasing Coral are both climate change films. I just got to adventure and travel and see the world, and one of them is about changing landscapes of glaciers. We did time lapses of glaciers changing all around the planet, and then the other one was time lapses of coral reefs, and documenting in Chasing Coral how reefs were changing all around the planet. Our last project, the latest one that just came out recently, called The Social Dilemma, is all about how technology, how social media, big social, is affecting our lives in invisible ways. Yeah.
I've seen all three of the films, and they're all super unique. The first two are stunningly beautiful. I mean, you could like drop acid and watch those films to the Pink Floyd soundtrack and have like the best time of your life. And then Social Dilemma is really remarkable in the way that it goes between sort of traditional talking head documentary style and scripted narrative,
right?
And in order to weave together what goes on inside the machine of social media, but also what goes inside of people's thoughts and how social media came to be. So I want to get into a little bit of that, a lot of that more later, but I want to talk to you about what you just mentioned, this darkroom. So you're growing up just outside of New York City, and your father's got this dark room in the house, and how did that, come into your life? Like, when did you always just remember from a little kid that your dad was making photos?
Yeah, I mean, and this is done trickling now, so now it actually just sounds like somebody's peeing in the background. But that's
Okay.
I think the sound's gone there. All right, perfect.
And if you need to blame it on me, because I might just have to get up and go pee.
So yeah, I grew up with this darkroom in my house, and my dad gave me a Nikon FM camera, and I think to some degree it was a means to keep me busy and occupied. But he taught me how to use the camera, and I just fell in love with it. And I would spend.
How old were you when you got your first camera?
Dude, 8 years old, maybe. Wow.
Wow.
I have to dig through my first roll of film that I think I shot myself and processed and developed myself. I was maybe 10. Wow. 10 or 12, something like that, is when I did the whole thing from beginning to end and learned how to do that process. And it really, I haven't used film and worked with chemicals in the darkroom for years now, but it really is a magical process when you can take a piece of paper, shine some light on it, put it in some chemicals, and literally an image just appears out of nowhere, and you know that you made that happen, and you like brought this thing to life and put this, like, those photons on that paper and made a photograph. And it was just one of the most magical things I think I could have ever pictured growing up with. And that it just embedded something in me. I think the other big thing was that my dad he subscribed to National Geographic. So my whole childhood, National Geographic came in every month, and that magazine with that yellow border was a window to the rest of the world. This is, of course, pre-internet days and a childhood back in the paper ages. Yeah. But it was such a special way to be exposed to the world and to think about people and culture. And I just wanted to travel. I just wanted to travel, see the world. And I had this realization that if you're the one taking pictures, your job is to travel. And you got to press a button, and you can go anywhere you want, and you press a button, and that's your job. And I just sort of fell in love with it.
Wow. So what did your mom and dad do for a living?
My dad was a high school teacher. And my mom's from Taiwan, and my parents met out there, and she came to the U.S. And my mom ended up working, kind of doing account work for a bank, and helped them do their international stuff with some Chinese clients and stuff. But they met out in Taiwan and came back to the U.S. and just set up shop on Staten Island.
So what was it like being, what ethnicity is your father?
My dad is Italian and Polish. So I grew up with like a whole blend of Chinese.
Do you got a name for that? Like a one-word
total
name?
mutt. I have no idea. There's no, there's a funny thing. There's a friend of mine in high school who also had the same half Chinese, a quarter Italian, and a quarter Polish background. And we both joked, like, if we had kids, they would also be half Chinese, quarter Italian, quarter Polish. It's just like such a random combination. But yeah, I grew up with Chinese food and Italian food being my two main food groups. That's what my mom and my grandmother cooked all the time.
Nice. And what was it like being a mixed kid in the neighborhood that you grew up in? Was it a thing at all, or was it,
I've spent a lot of time thinking about this in different ways. It was a very Italian heavy, very white Italian immigrant community, and I belonged to that too in some ways because my grandmother was Italian, but I was always like an outsider, and I always looked different, and everybody always asked me, "What are you?" It was like the most common thing. But interestingly, I think at the time, it's funny, I've never talked about any of this publicly, but my mom is an immigrant from Taiwan, and when people would ask her where she's from, I think she just always embraced it with a really positive optimism. She always saw like the good in the intent, and so she always responded with like an eager, positive, enthusiastic response. I'm from Taiwan. I moved here. Where are you from? And I think it was interesting because she always sort of responded with asking them where they were from too. So for me, it was always being asked, what are you? Where are you from? But also asking that question back, regardless of even in a majority white community that I grew up in, people had different answers. There were different answers. Different
I'm from 37th Street.
Right, exactly. Yeah. But it I don't know, it's sort of even the playing field in a different way, I think, at a really young age, just to see like, oh, you're from Germany, or oh, you're from Italy, or oh, you're from fill in the blank, or whatever country somebody had come from. It was, I don't know, it was interesting just to think back at what that experience was like. For me, I then went from Staten Island. I went to high school in Manhattan, and going from Staten Island to Manhattan was really just this huge mental and emotional shift as a freshman in high school, and being exposed to the world in many ways. Being exposed to the entire rest of New York City and the culture of New York City, and that was just like a beautiful and mind-boggling shift to experience at that point in life too.
What was the school like that you went to? Was it like multi-ethnic situation?
Yeah, it's a magnet school. It's called Stuyvesant High School. So it's a magnet school. It's a math and science high school. Our school was actually something like close to 50% Asian at the time. It was like 49% Asian. Relatively small black community. It was like a very small percentage, and then a handful of other minorities, and then the rest kind of Caucasian. But it was a very, very, certainly more diversity than what I was exposed to on Staten Island.
Yeah. And so you're coming in now into the city. How old were you when you went there? So you're like 15, freshman year,
I forget, freshman year, 15, 14, 15, 16. Yeah, something like 14 years old probably, Yeah.
So you're coming into the city now for the first time, and you're starting to just see, like you said, all the sights and sounds and cultures and just crazy and beautiful of New York City. And what were the things that really stuck out to you, or really resonated with you, or really maybe hurt you, or made you feel pain or indifference about the world?
Well, my senior year of high school was September 11th.
Oh wow!
And so I was the editor-in-chief of our school newspaper. My photography brought me into the school newspaper, and I was a photographer for the paper, and then became the photo editor for the paper. And then my senior year in high school, I became the editor-in-chief. And in that process, learned a lot about journalism, and was learning. We had editors from the New York Times come and teach us journalism every week. Wow. And this is like late 90s, early 2000s. This incredible opportunity at the school to get world-class journalism instruction from editors at the New York Times, and then the first week or something into our senior year, 9/11 happens. There once again, so many incredibly mixed, bizarre emotions about this whole time. We being our newspaper staff, we just kind of went immediately into work mode, where I mean, they're saying announcements over the PA and trying to evacuate the building, and my team and I are trying to figure out, do you have a press pass? Can you get out? Can you take photographs? Who's going to cover the story? What are the angles that we can cover? Like, that was our response as a a school newspaper. But we were 4 blocks away. I mean, we looked out the window and saw smoke billowing out, and plenty of my friends saw far worse in terms of people jumping and the like. It was a tough wake up call into adulthood. But that was kind of the. I mean, there's a silver lining in that. I think it was really this sort of training that I had, and I think our whole team had, in terms of being pushed and forced into responding to the moment, and recognizing the opportunity and the responsibility that we had to do our job as a newspaper and cover that story. So I don't know. I think it's that was a to your point around seeing the beauty and the horror of it all, and the wake up calls of adulthood and this bigger world out there. That was in many ways the launching point for me.
I'm curious. When you're talking about that responsibility of like, and being around, journalists from the New York Times who are really practicing that really, authentic style of like trying to be impartial, trying to really be fact-based, right, and evidentiary arguments, and, and I see that in your work today, but I also see something bigger than that, which is separates your filmmaking from just being like a news person, which is empathy.
Oh,
And
thank you.
it's saying like I see what's going on in the world, and this is something that hurts me, and I want to share my thoughts and feelings. I want to share some insight. I want to get people thinking about it in a different way. So I want to just backtrack a little bit. I mean, obviously, with 9/11, there was groups of people who were like, fuck empathy, let's go get them. Let's go march off to war. And then there were other groups of people who were like, yo, if we really want to get to the root of what this is, where this attack came from, we've got to think about this in a more holistic way and look into the way other people are living in the world and other things. So where for you did that empathy come from as you were growing up?
Oh, great question. So much to unpackage there. So much for my parents, first of all, just without a doubt. Then there was some organization. Dude, there's so many things I want to talk about right now.
Go for it, man.
For our school newspaper, we made a special edition for September 11th. And there was a quote we put on the back of the special edition. And the quote was a quote from Auden. We must love one another or die. And for a bunch of high school students to put this friggin' bold, like, we must love one another or die as this closing quote on our school newspaper. I mean, that I haven't thought about this quote in years, and you're referencing this time and this empathy just kind of brought it back for me. At that school that I went to at Stuyvesant, I had the opportunity to go to this very special camp that I was invited to as a freshman in high school. It's a camp called Camp Rising Sun. It's run by this foundation, the Louis August Jonas Foundation, and it happens in upstate New York. And when I went there, it was an 8-week-long program where kids from around the world got to live together and run the camp all summer. There was a separate boys' camp from the girls' camp. The girls' camp had 60 girls. The boys' camp had 60 boys. And for a solid 2 months of the summertime, we lived with kids from New York, with kids from around the U.S. and kids from around the world. So we had Israeli and Palestinian campers living together. We had campers from India, from China, Japan, South Africa, all over Europe, all over the US. And to be a freshman in high school, to get plopped into this global experience where every day of the season, one of the campers was in charge of the camp, like was the leader of the camp. Wow. And you had an elder that you worked with. There was a counselor of the day that you were paired with, and they kind of made sure to usher and guide you through the day and make sure nobody died or nothing burned down. But the campers got to decide what those experiences were going to be, and it was structured around collective knowledge. There was a period that you can. There were two main facets of the camp. One was instruction and one was construction. You could teach somebody something, or you could build something with people. And that was like, in many ways, the core backbone of this whole experience. So dude, it was like such a remarkable, I've spent so much time reflecting on this organization, because you come out of that experience, and once again, this is like pre-real internet days. I might have had an email account at the time, but you come out of that thinking, first of all, I got friends all around the world. I know people in all these different countries. If I was going through the Netherlands, I could stay at a friend's house, right? And so it makes you think differently about the Netherlands because you know somebody from there. Yeah. Like, I know Abhijit from India. Like, I want to hang with Abhijit. Like, I'm not, like, it breaks down the barriers of othering when you have a face, like a literal face and a person and a name and a friend, somebody who you would happily call a friend and have stay at your home. When you think of that other country, I don't know. For the longest time, I always thought like we need to have a mandatory practice in the U.S. where first only like 10% of Americans have passports, right? Yeah. It's some abysmally small number. We need some mandatory high school study abroad program where every American for 1 month in their high school tenure, they're going to some other country, and it doesn't matter what country they go to, right? Just pick a random, throw a dart at a board, do an exchange, get somebody to stay in your family's house, and you stay in somebody else's house. And if we had a huge program like that, I think that would go so far in terms of understanding peace, love, and empathy from an American perspective, at least, which I mean, we're seeing and feeling so palpably the pain and the anger and the hate that exists amongst us. You have to move past that framework that allows you to think of somebody else as other. So I don't know. That's a long-winded way to go back to your question, but we have these opportunities in life, I think, that can help find or build or cultivate empathy in each of us, and we need to maximize that. We need to grow that as best as we can.
So that really gives me a lot of insight into how you grew up and who you've become, and I want to know more about like what you do. So you went from just taking still photos to being involved in print journalism. And now, at what point did you pick up a video camera and start going, now, man, I can get these moving images, and I can combine it with music, and I can combine it with voiceover and with personalities. And now there's this whole like mosaic of interests that I have. When did that come into play?
I was in college, and I was doing photography, and
where'd you go to school?
So I ended up going to Stanford. So I went from Stuyvesant. I wrote about 9/11 as part of my application process there, and ended up going to Stanford. That actually was a critical part in that. So the reason why The Social Dilemma exists as a movie is because of those people that I met in college. It's because of the friends that ended up working in tech. But one of my closest friends from college, I don't know if you're familiar with Patreon or Pomplamoose, the band, but Jack Conte, who founded Patreon, was one of my dorm mates. Like, we were roommates at Stanford. Wow. And he's had such a huge influence on my life. I love him so dearly. And I was doing photography at the time, and I remember being at a photo gallery on campus one day, and I saw some students walk in, and they zipped through the room really fast, and they looked at all these photographs on the wall and walked right out. And I was like, they didn't read any of the captions. They barely looked at these photographs. It was just like this photographer put blood, sweat, and tears into making these images, and it was a fleeting experience for these people. They just went right through. And I remembered saying to Jack, I was concerned that my work in photography wouldn't have an impact, that it wouldn't be potent enough, or people wouldn't see it or respect it. And it was kind of at the same time where those kind of photographs on the web were starting to shift, and Flickr came out, and you could see photographs more easily, and stock photography had changed. And Jack twisted my arm and kind of forced me to take this film workshop that he was part of. There was a student workshop through the Stanford Film Society, and Jack was like, you have to take this workshop. And I had never done film. I had never picked up a video camera. I didn't know anything about script writing. It was all intimidating. I didn't have any stories that I wanted to tell. There's something very different when you're a photojournalist and your job is to be somewhere and document that thing. You're completely objective, and you can put perspective into like where you want to put the camera in and things like that. But it's really like, I'm not creating anything. I'm just documenting this thing that's happening. Yeah. And then to go into this film workshop, it was a complete mental flip. It's like we have 10, 15, 20 people who are going to work together, and we're going to all change everything in this room right now to get the shot that we want to get. And it was so completely different, but also really, really fun and entertaining at the same time. The notion of, instead of having to literally run and chase an event and try to keep up, you have everybody working together to make the shot perfect, to adjust the lighting, to check the makeup, and to do everything so that the sound and the image are exactly the way you want it. I just fell in love with it, and it was super fun. And then I made some films through that program, made some films through one doc class that I had. They went to some festivals, won some awards, had some great responses at some of those early festivals. And I just realized like the opportunity and the power of film. With film, you get to play with so many mediums. You get to play with photography, But you also get to play with moving photography. You get to choose what's in front of the camera. You get to play with audio. You get to play with dialogue and music and sound. You get to play with time, like literally time itself. I get to choose how long somebody's going to look at a frame or a scene or a moment. And film is one of the few places, I mean, this has changed so much with the, with the virus, with being at home, with streaming platforms like Netflix. In a movie theater, it's one of the few places where people put their phone away, right? Yeah. And actually, I'm going to turn my phone off. I'm going to give my full attention to this experience for an hour and a half or something. And people, you're totally hooked and captivated. And that's a rarity these days. Yeah. I feel like that's a specialty. Absolutely. Like the movie theater and the theater, like plays, watching performances, you get that full undivided attention. But even a musician on stage, you get to control time. You get to engage with an audience. You have that direct kind of interaction and that involvement. There's something about that I've just always loved. It's really special. There's just one thought to throw there. There's this really fascinating thing that happens with films in parallel to music. You can take a movie and put it in a movie theater and hit play, and it's the same exact thing that you hit play on every single time, but audiences respond differently different times, where filmmakers will know, oh, we had a good audience today, right? It's a weird thing that happens around how well the audience engages and responds with the movie. To some degree, it's like the acoustics of the room, the way it sounds. Like, do you feel the nuance that went into the audio? Yeah. Is the color perfect on the screen? Like, is it the experience that was designed by the filmmakers, or is it some broken down thing? But you get this real difference that happens in different venues.
Yeah, I've felt that just with my own films, and you like you said, every frame, every little nuance, every little sound, and you've done it in a way that you hope will evoke a response. And then you get into a room and you're like, wow, nobody laughed at that joke. And then the next day you show the film again. It's like everybody in the whole room was roaring in laughter. And the other thing that I love about film so much is collaboration. As a songwriter and as a band member and as a team member of this traveling team who tours around the world, we really are a team. And but at the same time, as a songwriter, I wrote a song last night on my guitar. I can go and stand in front of an audience or stand on a street corner or just play it for my wife, and that's it. Like, this song is done, it's over. But filmmaking requires like lots of people's minds working together over an extended period of time, and it's a different sort of collaborative thing. How did you find that, going from being just your own person, I presume, taking still photos, to now like, wow, I got to deal with these personalities and all this other input? And was that easy to let go of, or did you welcome that immediately?
I welcomed it. I think that's one of the things that I really loved at the start, was the real collaborative nature of filmmaking. And like you were saying, like, you're on a team now. It's not a one man trying to chase down the world. You've got this whole team that you get to work with. I completely fell in love with that. That was also, for me, the earliest entrance into filmmaking for me was going to Iceland with James Baylog to be his assistant and to carry a camera, and my job was to film what he was doing and what this team was doing. We went out there and installed cameras that were going to be there for years to document what the glaciers were doing, and it was this crazy harebrained concept that he had, and yet it yielded really, really powerful imagery and powerful ideas. It was really considered some of the first visual evidence of climate change that people could see and recognize, oh, wait, this is really happening. Yeah. It's something that James always shared with me that really, really struck a chord. He's been a mountaineer his whole life. He's gone and adventured. He's summited all these mountains. He's done really extreme, remote work. And there are a lot of people that do that for the fun and the thrill of it. And James's reflection was that he gets to do that while combining it with a mission, that he gets to combine his skills as a photographer with the adventure-seeking, desires, but doing it with a purpose, and to be able to combine these different passions in his life into this one thing. And that, I think that always stuck with me really tangibly, because for me, it's similar. I love to go on a good adventure, but is it just for personal selfish reasons, or is it for something more meaningful and more valuable and more important, more lasting? I sometimes, we sort of fallen into this routine with the feature film format, and these 3 projects, they take 2, 3, 4, 5 years to make. These are long commitments. Chasing Ice was a 5-year-long project, and sometimes I miss and look back on the days of making a short film where, hey, you want to make something this weekend? Great, we're done by Tuesday, and you have a new movie that's out into the world. I'm hoping I can get back into a cycle where the projects aren't necessarily all consuming for multiple years.
Awesome. I remember when I saw Chasing Ice. I've every time I go and play in Alaska, I always take a trip out to the glaciers. And I remember this one time we were flying. We left Anchorage and we were flying out. And we went to this one glacier, and the pilot was doing a very low fly over the water, and we were going straight at the glacier so he could give us a perspective of just how tall it was. I don't know, 10 stories higher or whatever, maybe more. And as we were getting close to the glacier, it wasn't super close, but a massive piece of ice, is like the size of a couple of different buses together, falls down, makes this huge wave. All these particles of ice, like tiny little particles of ice, come rushing towards us, and he's got to like make this big swoop up, and his heart's racing, and I'm like, man, the helicopter pilot's heart is racing. Yeah. I guess I should be thinking about being scared right now, man. These are powerful earth beings, these glaciers, Then when I saw Chasing Ice, it literally had me in tears. I was seeing that time-lapse photography and seeing these glaciers that just gone. It was like somebody had taken a hairdryer and was just going and melting them away. And having been there in person, even with the power of experiencing how big these things are and how massive it is when a piece of ice falls, it still didn't even touch me in the same way that seeing that time-lapse photography was. And I just wanted to share that with you about how emotional it is to see beautiful cinematography in that way, and with the music and with everything else. But it really touched me, and it really started me thinking about the way that I've been conducting my life, and what's my carbon footprint. And I eventually got an electric car and installed solar panels on my roof because I didn't want to be burning gas every day. And, the point I'm making is that film has this ability to touch people, and really stir people's emotions. How have you found that?
Roger Ebert used to call films empathy machines. And when I heard that phrase, I just that's so perfect. It's like, I have a tool that I can use that can literally capture and replicate and distribute empathy. Like, how badass is that, right? You can basically put empathy in a bottle and ship it places. And it's not, that's easier said than done. And there are plenty of films that don't capture empathy in a deep, powerful way. It's always a struggle. It's always hard. In any, documentary or narrative film, it can be really, really hard. One of our producers on Chasing Ice, her name's Paula. We'd always joke. She would reference that she had like a cryometer, and even, she could watch a scene 100 times, but if it was working, she'd cry, and if it wasn't working, it's like, no, something changed. It didn't do it for me this time. It's like, shit. All right, go back and edit some more. And how about this, Paula? Like, how's this look? And she said, oh yeah, I cried when I watched it. Yep. And or like watching her watch it. I think that's one of my favorite things is to watch people watch the scenes and see how engaged and hooked they are, or if they're kind of drifting. But it's so bizarre because there's this weird. It's an art and a science, and it's you can't you can't really put your finger on what's going to work or not. I feel like so much of it, at least the way we do it, so much of it is trial and error. And like, okay, I think the scene's going to work this way. Let's try it that way. Is that working? No, let's, cut it again. I thought that shot would go into this shot, but no, it's not. It's kind of falling flat. And maybe the other way. And I don't know. I love puzzles. I grew up doing puzzles, and I love a good puzzle challenge. And filmmaking, and I think documentary filmmaking in particular, it's just a bunch of puzzles. You're literally going out and collecting. The way I like to think of it is when you're filming, you're going out and collecting pieces of that puzzle. But you don't even know, this piece might be a blue piece, that one might be a green piece. It's like, oh, is this blue sky or is this ocean? I don't really know yet, but it's some texture of blue. And then you're in the edit room and you got all these pieces and you get to like cut the shapes into the pieces to try to get the pieces to fit together. And you're testing, I think all these blue things here belong in the sky, but no, actually it is a river. It needs to be a river instead. And I can get that blue piece to fit next to that green piece and the rocks, and you're collecting pieces, then shaping them and morphing them and molding them, and you're figuring out what the final picture is going to be as you're doing all of it. Because you don't exactly know what the picture, like you go in thinking you know what it's going to be, and it kind of reveals itself as you're out there capturing it. I don't know. I think there's a beautiful process there if you have the time and flexibility to kind of approach it organically like that and let the discovery be part of the process.
Jeff, man, when I sat down to watch The Social Dilemma, first of all, I'd heard a lot about it. I had all kinds of friends who were writing to me. I'd been reading things on Twitter, all kinds of news articles and stuff like that. And I was like, oh man, this is one of those movies that I got to like stop everything and like just focus. Me and my wife in the bed. We got to make sure that it's not one of the, normally when we watch Netflix, it goes something like this. All right, we got the ice cream, we got the popcorn, we're in bed, we turn the movie on, 10 minutes into it, the ice cream is consumed, 15 minutes in, the popcorn is gone, and 5 minutes after that, we're fucking assed out and sleep for the rest of the night and going, okay, how far did you see? That's the biggest argument in our house is like we go back to start to watch a Netflix movie and it's like, what do you mean? You told me you were asleep. You didn't even see the last 15 minutes. Like, and I got to start it back a little earlier than she wants it to be. So Sarah and I were like, okay, we're going to watch Social Dilemma. And we sit down to watch it. And Sarah's like on her phone. And I'm like, Sarah, this is the Social Dilemma. You can't be on your phone during this movie, all right? So that's how it started. And eventually, she did put her phone out, and we did watch a movie together. But like it's become so much a part of our lives, being connected to our phones. Mm-hmm. And there's some really obviously there's some great things, some super positive things. There's some things that really affect us in a really dark way. And if you could just give a little bit of just about the film, then we're going to break and we're going to bring people back for part 2 of this next week. And we're going to do a deep dive on the film. But sure, just talk to us a little bit about how you came to want to make this movie.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I was sharing, when I went to Stanford, I had a whole bunch of friends who ended up working in tech, and I was going to go down that path. I mean, a couple friends and I, we started our own tech company at the time. I used to work as an Apple campus rep. I was one of those Apple computer geeks in college, and I loved Apple computers, and it was so awesome. I could do all this filmmaking and photography and look at these tools, and I gushed about the platforms and the tech all the time. And I ended up going down my path to filmmaking, and my friends went down their paths to tech and to building companies and making apps and selling their companies to Twitter, selling their companies and getting acquired or going to Facebook and Google. And it was in 2017 where one of my acquaintances from college, this guy Tristan Harris, was posting on Facebook, ironically, a piece that he did on 60 Minutes. And he was on with Anderson Cooper, and he was criticizing Google, the company where he worked. And I was like, what is going on? Like, hold on a second, wait a second. Like, all our friends are working at Google, and he's talking about manipulative design, and he was referencing this as an existential threat. And it was just like some, fuses in my brain fried, because I just couldn't even comprehend what he was talking about. It just seemed so far from the image and the story and the worldview that I had around social media being this incredibly positive force, around it being able to like democratize communication. Anybody can speak. Look at the Arab Spring, and look at the role that Twitter played in the Arab Spring. And there was a story around free speech through these platforms. It seemed so idyllic and so perfect. I couldn't believe it when somebody was starting to criticize it. That was really what opened up the can of worms. And I started to, pull on that thread and talk to Tristan and talk to other friends who were working at those companies. And the response from others was like, I was skeptical of Tristan when he first told me about this. I didn't realize what he was saying there. And, I talked to him some more, and I realized, and it clicked. That was the first response that I had from some mutual friends. And that they too were skeptical. And when they thought about it more, they realized he was really onto something. And I just kept meeting more and more people through them who had a very different perspective of the tech companies that they all worked at. And we started exploring that. We started doing interviews and spent, a couple years going deep into the research and meeting with people. And here we are with this movie a couple years later.
Yo, this is going to be a great next episode. I can't wait for you guys to hear this next week. We're going to be talking about the film The Social Dilemma with Jeff Orlowski, and doing a deep dive on it. Jeff, thank you so much for being on this week's episode of the Stay Human podcast. It's been really awesome to know you or get to know you. And folks, if you haven't seen the film, go watch it between this week and next week, so you have a little bit better frame of reference about all the things that we're going to be talking about with Jeff Orlowski next week on the Stay Human podcast. Peace, y'all.
Awesome. Thanks, Michael.